GUWEIZ is just one of those guys. You know the type. Your Walops, your Loishas, your Ilya Kuvshinovs. You know, artists that have an immense following online for one thing only, their immense skill. So, a while back, GUWEIZ published an art book. I personally backed the Kickstarter. Yeah, I funded the whole thing, guys. No, I backed the Kickstarter, I got the book, and it's a really beautifully put together piece of work. There is a segment, though, that's an entire process breakdown of how he draws his stuff. So, I thought it might be fun to follow it step by step and draw exactly like GUWEIZ. So, in honor of GUWEIZ, we're going to draw some women in suits because that's what he's been doing lately. He was kind of known for a more fantastical style, but shifted into this more realistic style a little while back. So, I'll be taking my characters from my comic Doomsayer and drawing them like GUWEIZ. And I'll use the Black Scorpions characters, who are like the elite secret guard, which is fitting for the badass women in suits, right? And apply GUWEIZ's method. Side note, you can read my comic via my website, linked in the description, Mature Content Warning. By the way, there's also a store on my site. And Chapter 15 is going to come out real soon. Like, real soon, within the next week. Boom. Plugged. Done. Moving on. So, following GUWEIZ's instruction, first things first, a sketch. Pretty much the same starting point for every artist. Usually I set the background color to a mid-tone gray before starting, but based on the information in his book, he starts with a white background. His sketches are actually pretty rough. I thought they'd be more tight, but then I remembered that his finished pieces practically have no line work. I also referenced some of his work and realized that his positioning of characters adds more depth to the scene. So, you know, you could draw everyone up in the front, but moving characters around in terms of depth is a good way to emulate a 3D world on a 2D plane, right? Distance between characters, that kind of thing. So despite normally sketching in iterative layers and getting it really tight like I normally try to do, I approached it with a very loose sketch. In his book, GUWEIZ describes laying out local values and light sources. So local values are more or less how bright or dark something is in general, meaning that the suit jacket is darker than the white shirt, right? Then there's the initial light sources, which increase the brightness or darkness of whatever they hit or don't hit, right? I do use a grayscale layer underneath my color pieces, but GUWEIZ's approach is pretty different to how I do it. So after that, after adding all those grays, he then adds a pure white to where the light sources are hitting the hardest to really push the bright brights, you know, and to emphasize the darkest darks. So, I've actually used the curves feature of Photoshop many times to tint or shade a piece a specific color, but GUWEIZ uses it specifically for lighting, pushing the darks. There's also the color balance adjustment layer that I never touched before making this video. It more or less does what I used to do with curves and tints the piece a specific color, but I think it looks better in the end actually. Since this ended up being a nighttime scene, I pushed it more towards a blue cyan color. I think it's a pretty nice shade of blue. GUWEIZ also advised to adjust layer opacity, so I did, which I already did before this, so, you know, it's still part of my process. Just a little insert here. I just really appreciate the fact that GUWEIZ published his whole process breakdown inside of his art book. I wish more artists would do this. If you know of any other, like, super, like, talented, amazing artists like GUWEIZ that have put their entire process breakdown out there, let me know, and maybe I could turn this into a series where I try to emulate other like super good artists' process. It's kind of crazy how he goes from like this rough sketch to this like beautifully rendered piece. The dude is something else, man. Anyway, we're gonna keep moving forward with this process. So at this point, it was time to add some color. GUWEIZ stated that he created a soft light layer and then proceeded to paint over the line art. One thing he neglected to mention were what brushes he used. So here I am struggling to find out how he did this magical next step from his rough grayscale sketchy piece to these masterpieces, and the info is just not there. I wish he was a bit more thorough. So the thing is, I'm not a painter, I'm an illustrator. Line work is my jam, alright? Art with no lines, despite oftentimes being very beautiful works, are not my jam. So I ended up essentially destroying this piece. So the biggest problem in following these walkthroughs is that GUWEIZ does not address his brushes or his layer order. Me personally, I only really use the soft round and the hard round, right, that are built right into like every single digital art program. Occasionally the splatter brush and a few other texture brushes. And layer order is also extremely important to note. You know, do you color below or above the adjustment layers? How opaque is said layer? Are you deleting any as you go? And now, you may be thinking I'm blaming GUWEIZ for writing a quote-unquote bad process walkthrough, but in all honesty, it just really is my own stupidity and inability to follow something that doesn't have every minute detail, you know? Anyway, as to not disappoint, I'm going to restart this piece, but I'm going to draw it in my own style. Okay, so first things first, I altered the composition. I also wanted to make these characters' personalities come through a bit more. You know, if you read the comics, like in the description. I kept Yui up in the front because she's the leader, right? She has kind of a stoic vibe about her, so having her further apart from the other two and disengaged fits her style better. Hannah, the one in the most revealing outfit, is what you would refer to as a honeypot, and does work to gain secrets from oppositional governments, right? And she really enjoys this work. So I figured in a modern setting, she'd be looking at something on her phone. I like interactions between characters, so I had her showing Valerie whatever is on her phone. Valerie, being the most normal out of the three, has a pretty standard reaction. So as for the setting, I like the grungy rooftop vibe of the initial attempt, so I kept it pretty much the same. I'll probably photo bash a cityscape, with copyright-free images mind you, into the background. Overall, I think the second sketch went a lot better, and building on them till they get tighter and tighter is just a tried and true method for me. I can't really find myself taking another approach. GUWEIZ's sketch style is just too fast and loose for me, but hey, maybe it may not be for you, you know? I feel it's a good thing to see artists break down their process and take bits and pieces of various artists and see what you can add to your workflow. Not everything's going to work for everyone, but something's going to work for someone. As what I might grab from GUWEIZ moving forward in this piece, I feel like the color balance and soft light layer effects will be making an appearance shortly. By the way, guys, I just want to say the last video did exceptionally well and the channel's growth has been absolutely insane lately. I just wanted to add a little extra thank you in there. You know, like really, it means a lot, alright? Thank you so much. So, once I finalized the line work, color was next. I do use a grayscale layer, much like GUWEIZ did in the beginning, but I actually approach it a bit differently. I lay in the local values and then I add a second layer for shadows and grayscale. You may be asking why. So, what I do next is I add the flat colors on a layer above and lower the opacity. Boom, instantly shaded. Now for brevity, I just cut out the part of me laying in all the colors with all the selecting because that's kind of boring to watch. So what I did next was kind of out of order for me, but I added a soft light layer between the lowered opacity flat colors and the grayscale shadows. This was a new approach for me, and a mistake, but I'll get to that. So this helps give softer highlights and may add a subtler gradation to my pieces in the future, but applying GUWEIZ's teachings kind of just looks alright to me. Maybe it's just one of those things I just gotta keep doing until I get good at it. Anyway, my mistake was not adding a curves adjustment layer. I did after the fact and made the scene darker since it's nighttime. I also used the color balance technique GUWEIZ recommends to tint the scene bluer. This actually did really help add to the nighttime vibe. I also added additional layers for the smoke from Yui's cigarette and Hannah's stockings. I then tried something a bit different with a shadow layer. I usually pick a color temperature, in this case cool, and select the shadows and paint bucket them, but in this case I selected everywhere and paint bucketed them and erased out the highlights, which I think was a way better approach and how I'm going to do it from now on. Oh, and by the way, all shadow layers are set to multiply. I also always lower the opacity of the line work and erase it a little bit, but that's just kind of a style thing. Anyway, from there I added additional shadows that were darker under cast shadows and even darker shadows later under ambient occlusion, which is just a fancy word for the darkest part of a shadow, more or less. Those layers were set to multiply and ran through a Gaussian blur filter to soften the edges. I also added a bloom light from Yui's cigarette and Hannah's phone and set that layer mode to color dodge. I also used the soft round brush on those. Then I photo bashed the cityscape, which is a royalty-free image from Pixels, by the way, okay? And sampled it to add subsurface scattering and ambient light to the scene using the soft brush and color dodge layer mode coupled with a bit of erasing and Gaussian blur filters. Then I just added a hard light layer to really light up the edges, sort of similar to how GUWEIZ does it sometimes. I'll put like an image or two on screen. to show you what I mean. Except mine wasn't as good or even good at all, to be honest. So yeah, there was the color. So overall, I think I failed to emulate GUWEIZ's process, but getting some insight into how a master works is always a good read. I did manage to pick up a few techniques like the color balance adjustments and the soft light layers that I think will definitely come in handy, and I'll definitely be using them in the future. While I do love GUWEIZ's work, I still want to keep my own style and push that more. But like I said earlier, your style is most likely a culmination of various techniques from all of your favorite artists, more or less. So this is the finished piece. I'm not particularly happy with it, but you can only work on something so much until it's time to move on, you know? I did fail to draw exactly like GUWEIZ, but I did learn a thing or two. What do you guys think? Did you like this kind of video, and should I do it again? Or should I just quit art? Yeah, I should probably just quit art. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.